of the aim in the workplace. Oh wait, can you still see my screen, people online? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I just got a weird message. So I guess the reason why it's important to have a diverse and inclusive workforce is that diversity is great. I mean, Single Oil has a pretty diverse workforce, and there's lots of great benefits from it. Less misunderstandings. Well, I'm getting dripped on. I guess having like better problem solving when we've got lots of different perspectives, learning about lots of different motivational needs. So, we've got a diverse workforce, people, like to be, rewarded differently or, things like that. So having a broader sort of understanding of people's needs, making better formed decisions and having better expectations, and really just having a better team. The more diverse we are, the more kind of, better variety and perspective and things like that. On the other hand, if we don't have a diverse and inclusive workforce, we're actually at risk of, I guess, discrimination. There's, I guess, a whole long list of personal attributes and traits that we legally can't discriminate against, which I'll get into shortly. But beyond that sort of, legal aspect to it, we really, if we have if we don't have diversity and inclusion, we really just have a narrow-minded workforce. Everybody's thinking the same, everybody does the same. It's not going to be, we're not going to create new ideas and solve problems. So yeah, I guess that's sort of the benefit there. That's okay. All good. I guess I'm obviously talking about, we want to have a diverse and inclusive workforce, but there's actually, I guess, conscious and unconscious barriers to this. So the unconscious bias, I guess, being, we make judgments based on traits or attributes without even knowing. And that's just human nature. We do that. Sorry, that's the unconscious. I guess then the conscious is more, making decisions because of a specific trait. So I guess the point is, we might make decisions and judgments because somebody is different because of a number of different reasons. And that can really affect the business in a negative way if we're sort of judging people on that basis. So really the key here is just, we want to be more aware of, what our biases are and making sure that we're not kind of treating people at work differently because of them. Does that make sense? Everyone get that? Cool. Now I'm just going to run through some unacceptable behaviors, I guess. Really, I guess, heavy stuff, but they're, really important things to be aware of, know the definitions and, know what our stance is, I guess, and how to deal with these sort of things. So I'll go through discrimination, harassment, sexual harassment, bullying, and then psychosocial hazards. So in terms of discrimination, there's direct discrimination and indirect discrimination. So direct discrimination, when someone's treated less favorably because of that specific trait than somebody else. I guess indirect is when there's practices or, processes in place that, indirectly discriminate against someone because they might have a specific trait. An example I gave before is, I guess, a direct discrimination would be saying, in a job ad for a marketing role, we say you can't be in a wheelchair to get this job. That's directly discriminating against someone who, for the sake of that job, it's actually irrelevant if they're in a wheelchair or not. Whereas indirect discrimination with the same example would be having a workplace that is physically inaccessible to someone in a wheelchair. I know at Botany here, there is no place for a wheelchair to be able to get up the stairs, but Mike did kind of call out that, there should be like space for an escalator thing going up the stairs. So technically we should have one and we probably need to look into that. But that's just sort of to give you an idea of what the difference is between the direct and the indirect. Now, under the Fair Work Act, there's actually this long list of, I guess, attributes that we legally cannot discriminate against somebody for. So quite a long list, really just describes how we are as people. Interestingly, back in 2022, there were an additional 3 traits added to the list. So breastfeeding, gender identity, and intersex status. So it's interesting, I guess, that it's kind of ever evolving, or maybe I just find it interesting. It's my line of work. But like, I guess it's, the essence of it is, it's actually illegal to discriminate against anyone for any of these reasons. And I guess in terms of how do we actually make sure that our workplace is free from discrimination, it's all good and well to talk about it, but it really just comes down to, what are our practices in day to day. From the minute that it applies for a job that we've, posted an ad for, that's their first touch point with us. And from then on, we have to be really, really, careful, I guess, not to discriminate against them up till, when they leave us. So right from the beginning of the onboarding processes, onboarding, promotions, policies and practices, we want to make sure, they're not discriminating against people for any traits. Decision making and, remuneration decisions, things like that should all be, merit, performance based, not based on physical attributes, essentially. Yeah. Any questions?
To that, they're big, what's your bit? Is that something?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point because, there are traits that you'll need for a role, right? And I guess, a good example is, I guess, the more sort of physical roles where you actually couldn't probably have somebody in a wheelchair, but I guess to your point about this sort of the culture, that it's not, as long as it's, we're not discriminating against someone because of a specific trait they have. It's more they're not a culture fit because they won't fit in with, the people here, which is it's a fair judgment to make. I guess it's a yeah. No, exactly. And it's a gray area, and it's a tricky one at Single O because obviously culture is like a massive reason why we have the specific team we have. Yeah, I guess it's something that we do need to consider when we're looking at recruitment specifically and making sure that, we're not saying to people, you're not getting this job because, we don't like your attitude or you're not funny or whatever it is, like that's not a good enough reason. I guess my point is if somebody's good at the job, we need to be more kind of critical on our judgment, make sure that they're not discriminatory. Yeah. Okay. So harassment. So I guess in terms of definition, harassment is when there's unwanted conduct. Now, that conduct can be physical, it can be non-physical, it can be verbal. I guess the essence of it here is that it has the effect of violating someone's dignity and, creating a hostile, intimidating, or humiliating environment for that person. The interesting thing with harassment is that it doesn't have to be repeated. It can happen once to meet the definition of what harassment is. So it's really about, how does the person feel by this behavior being done to them in a one-off situation. And when it comes to testing whether it's harassment or not, if someone says I've been harassed and, we look into it and you make an assessment, the test is nothing to do with what the intention is of the harasser. It's really about the impact it's had on the individual that's, been harassed. So it's not, we can't say, oh, that person's just like that. They didn't mean to do that. It's okay. You did do whatever that is. And how does that feel? How does that make somebody feel? And it's, the test is about a reasonableness test. How would a reasonable person feel if they were treated that way? Would they be, would they be offended by it? Would they be humiliated? And then that's really the test. So it's not about intention, I guess, which is quite interesting. And I guess moving on to sexual harassment, it's really there's been a lot of change in the sexual harassment legislation over the last few years. I guess in terms of, when is it sexual harassment? It's the same as regular harassment in that it's unwanted conduct, but it's of a sexual nature. So any kind of sexual nature, sexual sort of conduct, can be verbal, can be physical, can be non-verbal, gestures, those sort of things. Anything of a sexual nature in any way, if it makes somebody feel humiliated or intimidated or uncomfortable, it could be considered sexual harassment. And again, it can happen once off. It doesn't have to be, a series of incidents. And And yeah, so again, the legislation's really moved away from allowing the whole, that person is just like that, they do this all the time. It doesn't mean anything. It's really, okay, but how does the other person feel when they're treated like that? I thought I would show you guys some examples. I'm sorry for those who are driving. That's okay. It's all good. I guess I wanted to, show some examples just really to show the kind of span of, what could be considered sexual harassment. So some things on here might be obvious to you, but some may be less obvious. So I'll read some out. Comments about a way a person looks, sexually suggestive behavior, brushing up against somebody or hugging, sexually suggestive comments or jokes, displaying offensive screensavers, photos, calendars, or objects, repeated requests to socialize, requests for sex, sexually explicit posts on social media, insults or taunts of a sexual nature, intrusive questions into someone's personal life, sending sexually explicit emails or texts, inappropriate advances in social networking sites, and accessing sexually explicit internet sites. So obviously it's not an exhaustive list, but I guess I wanted to show kind of the span of, it's not just what we would typically consider, touching somebody inappropriately is sexual harassment. There's also, so far as displaying an inappropriate image on your devices could be considered sexual harassment if somebody is, made to feel intimidated or uncomfortable with that. So it's quite a broad sort of range. Any questions on those? Pretty clear. Cool. So I was talking about this before, I guess the changes that have happened in the legislation. Back in 2022, there was a Respect at Work bill that was introduced, which basically means that as a business, we have an obligation to proactively prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, which has, been a massive change to how we've seen, sexual harassment cases come out and grievances. It used to be that, sexual harassment wasn't considered serious misconduct in a lot of cases back before 2022. People were found to be sexually harassing, their colleagues or someone in the business, and nothing was happening to them. They were staying in the business. So they really cracked down, and they've now said that businesses are obligated to have a positive duty to essentially prevent sexual harassment. So, we can't anymore just sort of wait for an incident to happen either. We have to sort of proactively prevent it, put in measures, do trainings, things like that. But also if we see or are made aware of a situation that that could fall under this category, we're actually all obligated to sort of raise it and bring it to the forefront and proactively do something about it. And I guess how we're sort of looking to do that, or we are doing that, is, running trainings, which I'm doing now. That education piece is really big. And then having the, policies and procedures in place to really back that, which we're sort of revamping as well, and we'll kind of relaunch to everybody. But more so than that, I guess in this sort of day-to-day is just having sort of control measures in place, and throughout the process of going through, looking at policies and procedures, we're re-looking obviously in what day-to-day, how do we sort of assess and prevent these situations from happening, and making sure that it's a cultural, it's a cultural move as well, that there's a zero tolerance approach, and that the culture really backs that here at Singular. We don't want anybody to feel, that they might be put in an uncomfortable position, and if they are, we want everybody to feel comfortable enough to call it out, essentially. Interestingly as well, Queensland has kind of gone a bit further than some of the other states, and basically introduced a new legislation a year ago to say that businesses now have to have a physical plan in place to prevent sexual harassment, which is awesome. I'm sure the other states will sort of catch up over time. Katie and I are working with the team at the moment to develop that physical plan. And it's something that we'll sort of get everybody to see and look at and have some input into as well, because it's really like a risk assessment. What is the workplace? What are the risks that we currently have, and how are we going to deal with them, if there is an incident? So it's really, I guess it's good to have those things in place for if these issues do ever arise. Does anyone have questions on sexual harassment before I move on? No? Okay. Bullying. So just to recap, so harassment can be, a one-off incident. The difference with bullying is that it has to be repeated. There's kind of those two key elements I've got on this on the slideshow there. It's got to be repeated and unreasonable and cause a risk to health and safety. So that could be a physical risk or a psychological risk. But essentially, when there's a test of, is it classified as bullying, it has to meet that definition, it has to be repeated to be considered bullying. It's really the difference there. And I thought I'd again show some examples because, again, I think there's some that would be more obvious and some that would be less obvious. So abusive, insulting or offensive language, physical assault, teasing people, gossips, rumor, unreasonably overloading a person with work, setting timelines that are extremely difficult to achieve, setting tasks that are unreasonable beyond someone's capabilities, ignoring or isolating people, deliberately denying people information, deliberately excluding or isolating people from workplace activities, intruding on someone's space, or like messing with their equipment, intrusion into somebody's personal time through calls or texts or emails, and behavior or language that frightens, humiliates, or belittles somebody, or screaming or yelling. Again, not an exhaustive list, but I guess with all of these examples, I guess it has to be on multiple occasions for it to be classified as bullying. Not to say that if any of these examples were to happen once, it's acceptable. It's probably just called harassment or called something else. So for bullying, it's got to be repeated. That's kind of the kicker there. Any questions on bullying at this stage? No. Wait, I can't hear you. Did you say something?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. With the bullying and the repeat offending, is that specific to one employee that the bullying kind of occurs, or is it across a number of different, as in like the one, say for example, I'm doing the bullying to one employee, or does it account for all that?
Yeah, no,
Sorry,
that's
I'm
a good
not really-
question. I get your point. I think when we're saying repeated, is it repeated? Does it have to be to the same person?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially yes, because if we're looking like if we're saying that you're bullying me, to meet the definition of bullying, you've got to be doing it repeatedly to me. If you're kind of doing the same thing to me as you're doing to a number of other people, it might not necessarily be considered bullying, but it's still potentially is behavior that is inappropriate and would be considered potentially harassment. Yeah. Cool.
What about,
So,
what about
yeah,
what about the other way? If I say felt bullied not by an individual but a whole organization, like is that a thing as well? Like if it's the same issue but from multiple different people?
yeah. I mean that sounds like a really deep-seated cultural issue. Yeah, that we would definitely need to deal with. I guess for the definition of bullying, it needs to be repeated by the same person again. So it would probably, but I guess if it's a kind of cultural behavior that, all managers are kind of, unreasonably overloading, you with work, yeah, that could potentially meet the definition. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. No worries. Now, I wanted to just talk about reasonable management action. And to give that a definition, that's action that is conducted by management that is reasonable, not to state the obvious, but I guess for it to be, it needs to be reasonable. And if it is reasonable, then it is not considered bullying. I guess the important thing here is, you're going to, potentially have to receive, difficult feedback or have hard conversations, from your manager from time to time. But that doesn't mean that it's bullying just because it's a difficult piece of feedback to receive, essentially. And we've got, processes in place to deal with, performance issues or, conduct issues or things like that. As long as the process conducted is reasonable, then it's not considered bullying. So, being performance managed and processes around performance management, not necessarily bullying. Obviously, if it's done in a way that causes risk to your health and safety, then potentially it could be, but the process itself in its sort of process form is not bullying. Disciplinary action for misconduct as well. Informing someone that their work is unsatisfactory or that their behavior is inappropriate. Again, that's not bullying. Directing somebody to, perform their duties in line with what their role requires them to do. Again, not bullying, and, maintaining reasonable goals and standards. Again, the way that it's delivered can obviously change whether it's, bullying or considered something else. But my point is, I guess, reasonable management action that is conducted reasonably is not bullying. Any questions on that? Cool. Now, I wanted to talk about psychosocial safety. So in 2023, the Work Health and Safety Act, which we would all probably have an idea of, is, up till 2023 has, been all about physical safety, hazards, risks, things like that. They've now included psychological safety under the same act, which basically, means that we now not only have to look out for physical risks and hazards and prevent them, we also have to do the same for psychological risks and hazards. So I guess, as you can imagine, it's, a little bit more of a kind of grey area, but it's a really, really good addition to the legislation. I think so, at least. Maybe that's just me being an HR nerd. But yeah, I guess a new change, which is interesting. And this was a thing, you probably remember the introduction of like the right to disconnect, that sort of thing that's kind of saying, working unreasonable overtime hours, that's actually causing risk to someone's health and safety. It just might not be their physical health and safety, it might be their psychological health and safety. So the law really changed to consider those factors as well. Again, similar to the sort of sexual harassment piece, which this is really closely linked to, we as an organisation have an obligation to proactively prevent psychosocial hazards the same way that we do with physical hazards. We've got safety procedures in place of, ways we do things, having certain amounts of people, in certain areas at certain times, those sort of things. We now also have to proactively prevent what psychological, risks and hazards there might be in the workplace. And I also wanted to just shout out, because we was talking about this quite a bit in the first session, that, obviously across the business, there's a single O team, but then there's the customers, the visitors that, a lot of people will deal with, on a frequent basis. They're all considered in this as well. If it, and I know it's a bit of a broader spectrum and can be more logistically challenging to deal with, but essentially when you're at work, you should not be, treated you shouldn't be, experiencing any of these sort of behaviors. So it doesn't really matter who's doing it. It's not acceptable, and we can deal with it. I wanted to show you guys, I guess, a list of what psychosocial hazards are, because it can probably feel a bit like a buzzword, but these things probably don't feel like buzzwords because they're all really relevant things that exist in the workplace. So job demands, low job control, poor support, lack of clarity. So these are all things that can be hazards and that we kind of need to look out for in that sort of proactive prevention mindset. Poor organizational change movement, inadequate reward and recognition, poor organizational justice, traumatic events, remote or isolated work can also be a hazard. Poor physical environment, violence and aggression, bullying, harassment, poor workplace relationships, fatigue, and intrusive surveillance. So all things that can be hazards. A lot of these things, will come up from time to time, but I guess the proactive measure here is for us to just be really aware of, how do we make sure we're not, fatiguing ourselves. And if we do feel like, we have poor support, we bring it up and we talk about it to proactively prevent it. And how do we do that? Very much the same as we do for physical, physical, like work health and safety, physical hazards. We identify the risks, and we develop policies and procedures to capture those and to, put in place what we do if we do come in contact with risks or hazards. promoting a supportive work culture. So obviously the policies and the training and all of that is great, but really making sure that it's actually embedded in the culture, and especially when people enter into the business, they're aware that this is a stance that we have, that we don't take we take this stuff very seriously. Making sure that we have adequate resources and support, and then constantly sort of evaluating and monitoring. So that's, the same way we would with physical risks and hazards, we've got to keep sort of making sure that the procedures and policies we have in place are still relevant. So that's that sort of ongoing piece. Any questions on psychosocial safety? All pretty clear. Anyone on Teams? No. Cool. Cool. So resolving grievances. Wanted to just share, I guess, obviously we've got processes in place for what to do if you do have a grievance, or I guess an incident or an issue with any of the things that I've been talking about today. I guess in general, there's the informal and the formal routes, and really depending on the severity of the situation will depend kind of, how formal or informal it is. But generally speaking, I guess, step one is, attempting to resolve the issue yourself if you feel comfortable with that. If you don't, or if you don't feel comfortable, then, meet with your manager or meet with us from HR, or, a manager in the business to share your concerns, like escalating it up, I guess. And then, depending on, I guess, how severe it is, that management team might, talk to Mike about it, and kind of figure out how formal we make it. And in some situations, there might be an investigation to really sort of look into, what's going on. Again, that can be formal and informal as well. And then the aim, I guess, of the whole sort of process is to find a resolution and, make have some agreed actions to, stop the behavior or fix the behavior, whatever it might be. And then in terms of, I guess, what possible outcomes can come out of these sort of grievances, again, really just depends on the situation, the severity, who's involved, what each party, can sort of accommodate. But training, acknowledgement and apology, mediation, further monitoring on the situation, and, leading up to serious misconduct and dismissal as well, depending on the severity. So quite a broad range of outcomes that can happen depending on what the incident is. But I guess the point is that there are outcomes, there are actions that will be taken if there's any incidents that arise. And then in terms of what role we all play, as I've kind of mentioned throughout, obviously as a business, it's, our obligation to make sure that we're kind of proactively preventing and eliminating these kinds of risks, and making sure that no one's being discriminated against or bullied or harassed. Management is responsible for ensuring that happens as well. And then as employees, everybody is responsible for respecting each other and just treating each other respectfully. And we've got policies in place as well that if you don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to your manager about, in the first instance, you can always go to our policies or reach out to us at HR or another manager. But really it's everyone's, I guess, responsibility to make sure that we've got, a healthy and safe work environment. So in terms of what we expect from everybody is that you read and understand the policies that are in place. And as I said, we're kind of working on revamping them and, working on the sexual harassment prevention plan, things like that. So you'll kind of see these coming out over the next sort of little while. And, we really want people to sort of read them and understand them. This training would obviously help that as well, because it's really just the backbones of what I've spoken about today. We expect that everybody behaves appropriately and everybody, seeks to resolve issues and deals with concerns, and that you speak up if you do see inappropriate behavior. So even if it's not, regarding you, call it out. If it's unacceptable, we need to know about it. Any questions on that? Okay, I've got a little quiz. Essentially, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read out some sort of behaviors, and I just want people, you can just yell it out or say it out loud, whether you think it's appropriate conduct or not. and then we can sort of see how well you guys go. So organizing a lunch and inviting everyone in your team except one person, is that appropriate or
Not
inappropriate?
appropriate.
Correct. Correct. Every employee having a performance review meeting on an annual basis. Appropriate or inappropriate? Appropriate. Got nods, got thumbs up. Cool. Putting your arm around a colleague because they're unhappy. Appropriate or inappropriate? Nice. It is, yeah, there we've got some of these. So okay, baseline answer is no. It's absolutely not appropriate to put your arm around anyone in the business. However, if it's consensual and you've got a relationship with someone that is mutual and you know that they are happy with you doing that, and even if that means you need to ask them out loud, can I give you a hug right now? Then it could be okay. Obviously, you know, best practice says one thing and single O culture might say something slightly different, but I guess I'm wanting to stress that not if there's one person in the whole business that you wouldn't want a hug from, then you need to have a baseline that not everyone in the business would want a hug from you as a sort of baseline. Cool. Commenting on multiple occasions about a colleague's weight, appropriate or inappropriate? Yep, Josh saying inappropriate. Inappropriate. Yeah, but it's still not really for you to comment on, you know? I again, obviously these things can be taken like if you're on a weight loss or gain journey with a friend or whatever, but generally speaking, do not ever comment on anyone's weight ever. That's baseline no. Forwarding crude jokes to people inside and outside the company. Appropriate, inappropriate. Inappropriate jokes. Yeah. No. Yeah. Okay. We've got thumbs down online. No, not appropriate. Again, I said this and we talked about this in the last session because obviously I can see a lot of you are looking at me like, yeah, but we all do this anyway. This is the culture here. No. You guys are muted if I'm meant to be hearing you online, but yeah, I guess the point is the whole essence here is you never know if someone is going to be offended. You might know that most people won't be offended. However, one person in the room who, you know, maybe you don't know as well or who's quiet or is pretending that they're okay might actually be really offended by that. And then that means that they're, you know, in an uncomfortable position and we really want to avoid that. Publicly ridiculing someone even if they take it well. Appropriate, yes or no? No. Correct. That's yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, no. But I guess again, the whole thing is you never know if someone's taking it well. Are they actually taking it well, or are they really offended? Yeah, no. Mike was very quiet. Repeatedly making gossipy comments among co-workers regarding the perceived underperformance of a colleague. Yes or no? Is that appropriate? Should we be talking about other people's underperformance? No, we shouldn't. Absolutely not. Criticizing your manager on Facebook outside of work hours. No, not appropriate. No, not appropriate. Don't do that. Organizing drinks after work and inviting your whole team except one person because they don't drink alcohol. Appropriate or inappropriate? Not appropriate, correct. Yep. Let them say no if they don't want to come, or they can get a non-alcoholic drink. Inviting someone from work out on a date. Appropriate or inappropriate? Anyone? Come on, elaborate. Why? Why is it a gray area? Okay.
It could be in a day with friends.
Yeah. Okay. Or a romantic date.
It's technically inappropriate, right?
Yeah. It's a gray area too, and we did talk about this because I think this has happened before. But I guess the baseline is no. We should not be doing this. The right answer is no. However, there's obviously context that if it's consensual, and I can't stress that enough. I mean, that's in the real world too, right? You're not going to pester someone to go on a date in the real world outside of work if they don't want to. That could also be considered, you know, harassment. So it's all about that consensual piece. Obviously, it can be tricky, but do your research, know who you're talking to, know the relationship. The same as making jokes with people, know who you're talking to. Criticizing a colleague's mistakes in front of others to teach them a lesson. Is that appropriate? I'm getting maybes on the screen. Care to elaborate? Elaborate, please.
If it was if it was to set an example based on the job guidelines, yes. Like if it was indirect, like direct feedback, is that not okay?
I guess, and it's a good point. I guess criticizing their mistakes in front of others, I guess you want to give them the feedback one-on-one before you're sort of bringing everyone else into it, I mean, and we talked about this in the last session as well, like obviously there's, if it's a life or death, a machine's going to, fall on someone's head, obviously you scream at them and tell them to move out the way or whatever it is. But, I mean, there's still a way to communicate it so that it's not, you're not going to yell and swear at people because they made a mistake. Yeah, it's the way you deliver it, is sort of the kicker there. And in most instances, you should be giving the feedback one-on-one to the person in a constructive manner. And then if it is worth, sharing, the feedback, I guess, to the group, being conscious of how we're doing that. So we're not making people feel uncomfortable or targeted. Okay, just a few more. Okay, requiring all employees to attend a team meeting at 7 a.m. every now and then. Appropriate or inappropriate? Yeah, appropriate. Yep, I'd agree. Every now and then, depending on your role. I'm sure some people start at 7 every day, so that's probably totally normal. Your manager berating you in front of coworkers for constantly being late to meetings. Appropriate or inappropriate? Not appropriate. Yeah, exactly. In front of everyone, that's really the kicker. Advising a staff member on multiple occasions that they have completed a task incorrectly. Appropriate or inappropriate? Yeah, depends. Yep, depends how you deliver it. I mean, I think the wording of this one, it's not berating them or, it's not doing it in front of everybody. So that's kind of the key there. It can be one-on-one. Writing sexually explicit comments on someone's Instagram DMs. Appropriate or inappropriate? Everyone together now. Inappropriate. Great. Okay, we've learned something. That's good. Repeatedly ignoring or isolating someone from a conversation because you don't want to be friends with them at work. No, should not do that. Should not do that in the context of work. Good. Glad everyone agrees. Deciding not to promote someone because they haven't yet gained the necessary experience for the role. Is that appropriate or not? Yeah, that's appropriate. Swearing every now and again. Appropriate or inappropriate? Technically, is it appropriate? Technically, no. Technically, we should not, because if there's someone in the room who feels uncomfortable, then how do we know if they, I mean, okay, this is again, it's hard I mean, there's best practice and then there's, let's be real, single O practice. People do swear. I guess what if I can get a message across in that context, it's just be conscious of who's in the room when you're doing that. I know it can be in the open room, wherever it is, and but there might be people around there who are really uncomfortable with it. Hopefully they speak up to someone if they do feel uncomfortable, but it's good to just have a bit of, be a bit more mindful of, who we're swearing in front of. Cool. Done. Any questions? Any final thoughts? Did we learn something today? Cool. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Oh, bye. Thanks, Katie. I'm gonna hang up on this one now.